And that is it for my January reads. I said January, really funny. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my January wrap up. So today we are here to wrap up everything that I started the year with, as in my January reads. I have quite a few actually. I ended up reading 14 books, which is pretty good. I mean, I have had a pretty steady stream the last, I'd say half a year, where I'm usually somewhere between 12 and 14, 15 books. But last year I started off the year with 9 books, so I'm going to take this as a win. So it's a hodgepodge of stuff this month. I mean, really, I'm just looking at my stack and thinking of all the books that I actually ended up reading, and it is a wide variety. Pardon. So without further ado, let's just get right into the stats of the month. So like I mentioned, I did end up reading 14 books, and that was over 5,596 pages. I did have some tomes this month, so that worked out pretty well. And then my format is relatively spread out. It usually is in 2 categories specifically, but it's all over the place because we had 4 audiobooks, 4 physical books, 2 ebooks, and 4 mixed books. And this month the mixed books weren't just physical or ebook and audio. It was physical and ebook. It was all over the place this month. And then as far as my age categories go, this did stay pretty normal for me. We had 1 middle grade, 4 YA, 1 new adult, and 8 adult books. And then my genres were, they're pretty normal for me. I had 4 romance, 4 fantasy, 2 historical fiction, 2 contemporary, 1 nonfiction, and 1 mystery. And my star ratings, again, pretty normal for me. We had 4 5 stars, 5 4 stars, and 5 3 stars. I started off the year with my Tessa Dare buddy read, so I picked up A Week to Be Wicked by Tessa Dare. This is the second in the Spindle Cove series, which is a, I think, 5-book series with a few novellas split here and there that follows a bunch of people that live in this place called Spindle Cove. It is a seaside town that a lot of women go to when they don't fit in with society, wallflowers, they've got some sort of illness, things like that, and it's relatively, a lot of people who don't live there call it Spinster Cove. But in this book specifically, we follow Minerva, and we actually did meet her in the previous book, and she and this kind of scoundrel of sorts who has come to the town within the first book of the series, they end up going on this road trip and they're forced into the same situation. He has a lot of trauma in his past, so he can't spend the night alone, so he has to have somebody in the same bed as him. So we've got the 1 bed trope, and then there's a lot that's there. But this did end up getting about 3.5 stars, I think is what, yeah, I was going to get 4, and then we bumped it down to 3.5 stars. And I have very similar feelings to the first book that I read in the series, which was A Night to Surrender, I believe, which I did read in December. And it just I don't know, it didn't fit right. It wasn't the Tessa Dare writing and the Tessa Dare characters that I had come to love in her past books. It just kind of felt like this entire series is off for some reason. And this was one of my favorite characters in the first book. I loved her. I was so excited we were going to be getting her story, and then we got her story and it was just kind of okay. So I'm really hesitant towards the next one because we've gotten hints in this book to the 3rd book and that romance, which I'm very excited about. It has lots of hints to reminiscent hints of what I'm used to when it comes to Tessa Dare's writing, but again, hesitantly optimistic because of I've been burned in the past. And I don't really have a reason to really dislike this series. It's just I don't connect with any of the characters. I don't believe any of the romances. And this one specifically, Minerva, is a really strong-willed woman, and by the end of it she kind of isn't anymore. And well, yes, I want her to find someone to love. I want her to still be herself. I don't want her to jeopardize, or not jeopardize, but basically give up who she is to be with someone, and that's kind of what it felt like. So I was really not in love with where this ended. I liked this one more than the first one. I think I've already said that. So I definitely had better feelings about this couple, but overall it was just kind of generally okay. So the next two I'm going to actually do kind of together because they're the two Philippa Gregory books that I read, and I have a lot of similar feelings about like the writing and stuff, so I'm just going to kind of talk about them together. So the first one is The Other Boleyn Girl, and this one primarily follows Mary Boleyn, who is the sister of Anne Boleyn, who becomes the Queen of England, and it follows her throughout court. Like, it starts with her really young, and it follows her as she's kind of the person that Henry VIII comes to and like really wants to be with. She even like bears a couple of his kids, and then his fondness starts to go towards her sister, and so she's kind of forced to help out and kind of make her sister the queen. And then it follows her as she goes through this court, and then also like where she falls in love at the end with someone that she actually cares about. And then the second one is the Boleyn Inheritance, which follows three separate women. So we have Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Jane Rochford. So Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard are both wives of Henry VIII. Anne of Cleves was the fourth wife, and Catherine was the fifth wife. And Jane is actually the sister-in-law of the Boleyns, and she has been basically tailored by their uncle to do what's right for the family. So it's the three of them at the start of Anne's reign, not Anne Boleyn, Anne of Cleves' reign, and we follow her coming over to England and becoming Henry's wife, and then them not really working out so well, and then they divorce, and Catherine Howard becomes queen, and Catherine is actually a cousin of the Boleyns. Like, the Howards and the Boleyns go together family-wise. They're all cousins. And so we see the three of them in their respective, like, perspectives. And it's really interesting because most of history, the only things that we know about Anne and Catherine is that Anne is thought to be really ugly, and that's why Henry divorced her. And then Catherine is supposed to be this like really promiscuous woman who like slept with everybody, and that's why she got beheaded. And I liked the take that Philippa Gregory had of giving them a different story and a different reason, just kind of more substance behind what was happening, because like Anne is probably the luckiest of all of Henry's wives based on kind of what's happening in here, because she was able to continue to live in England on her own after they divorced, and like was even able to live like kind of out of the pocket of the crown a little bit. Like, I mean, you got an allowance, so she wasn't living like luxury, but she was living fine, you know. And then you've got Catherine, who is just this young, like really young, like I think 15, she's 14, 15, who is like thrust into this marriage with like a 50-something-year-old man at this point, who is literally like dying before her eyes, because she's not his last wife. There's one more after her, but like it was near the end of his life. So it was just really interesting to see these two perspectives. And I know that The Other Boleyn Girl is, I want to say, the most popular in this series, just because it was made into a movie. So I'm very curious. I want to see the movie of this again, because it's been quite a few years, and obviously there's a lot more in the book than there is in the movie. And I think it's interesting because the book is Mary's perspective. Like, we are following Mary the entire time. Even though her world is kind of revolving around Anne, it's still Mary's story. Whereas the movie kind of twists it to be a mixture of Mary and Anne's, and it becomes more of Anne's story a little bit. But I think I liked The Other Boleyn Girl a little bit more than Boleyn Inheritance. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I think I gave the Boleyn Inheritance 4. So I really enjoyed it. This was a fun dip back into this Tudor world. I liked having that break, but then I also like devoured these two back to back. So I'm excited to continue. Hopefully I won't have such a long break between. I knew after reading the second one, I was like, okay, I do actually need a break now from her writing, because if I had just like plowed through and read the rest of her books, I would be so done with the Tudors. So I'm really glad that I picked these up, and everyone who told me this one was really good, you were not wrong. This is probably one of my favorites of hers. It's definitely my favorite of this month, and I think it's up there as one of my favorites from this series. Also, as a heads up for The Other Boleyn Girl, trigger warning for miscarriages, and like the repeatedness of it. Like, not necessarily repeated miscarriages, because that is a thing, but like the talk of it comes up a lot, and it's very graphic in its description. So just super heads up for that. The next book that I ended up picking up was Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas. This is the third in her Wallflowers series, and this is a series of 4 women. It's like a friend group, and each book is their respective romance. I'm very intrigued by this because we get to see some of the friends in here, and like obviously this is the third, so the first 2 books, like who ends up with who is spoiled, but not any of the situations, so I still want to get to those. But this one follows Sebastian, who is a lord, and he's just kind of like a giant rake. And I think he had a huge part in the 3rd book, because I feel like this starts off right in the action. But we also follow a girl named Evangeline, and she has an awful, awful family. They don't like her parentage. Her father is actually the owner of some sort of like bar and like they play games and stuff like that there, and she's never allowed to see her dad. She's basically like forced to live in this house, so like huge trigger warnings for familial abuse, both physically and mentally, because like there's a lot of stuff that like is revealed throughout this book. But she's had not a great life, and so she's thinking, the only way to get out of this is to get married, because she is going to be forced to marry her cousin for her wealth, basically. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. So she finds this lord who basically kidnaps someone because he wants to get married. I think he needs money, I think is what it is. And so they strike up a marriage of convenience and they go off and get married. And it's a lot more than that, because she thinks her dad is dying, and so she wants to go visit him, and she needs to get away first. So it's their relationship, and I, from page 1, fell head over heels in love with our main male lead. He was so much fun. Like, he is the definition of like a cinnamon roll character wrapped in a hard exterior, because like he is so like, I'm tough to the world, but then like he will do anything for the person that he loves. He will fight to the ends of the earth for this person. And it was just beautiful to watch. It was also really beautiful to see some of the stuff that had happened in his past, kind of like some of the stuff that he has done to some of his friends come full circle and just have like that healing moment as well. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars, or 5 stars. Wow. No, I loved it. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. So yeah, I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I fell, like I said, head over heels in love with our main male lead, but I also loved the chemistry between our couple because it felt almost immediate. Like, it wasn't insta-lovey. It was like, I don't know, there was just something about it. Like, he was, even though he was still rough and like hard exterior at the beginning, he was still sweet with her and made sure that she was comfortable with everything and stuff like that. It was just really sweet, and it definitely took a turn that I never thought it would. Like, we got more into like the club life as well, which I never thought we'd ever do that, and we did, and it was really interesting to see both of our characters kind of come into their own, which was just beautiful. So if you like any of those fun tropes, forced marriage, proximity, I'm sure the one bed trope is in here somewhere, like all of the things, this is your book, and I want to read the rest. I want to read the 4th one specifically because things aren't mentioned in here, like hinted at for one of the other girls, like the last girl who hasn't gotten married in this group yet, and I need to know because, like, oh, it would be so cute. So yes, I adored this book. Apologies for the light change. It's going to happen for the rest of this video. It is that time of day where the sun is starting to set, and so it's making my blinds do weird things. But the next book that I picked up was the 4th volume of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, which I ended up giving 5 stars to. So, I mean, the trigger warning list for this is long. So the ones that I picked up on was eating disorders, homophobic slurs, self-harm, things like that. So if anything remotely revolving around that is a trigger for you, I would see if I could find a full list of trigger warnings online that maybe the author has put out there or something. But this entire series follows our 2 main characters, Nick and Charlie, and their relationship as it progresses. And this one takes a turn, because while they've had an established relationship for the last couple, actually almost the entire series, it has a very interesting and I think very important conversation in this one that surrounds mental health, specifically surrounding eating disorders, but also surrounding the people who are there to help the person who's going through it. So not only do you have the person who's going through it, you've also got the person that's there with them and how they are trying to be helpful and be there for their person. And also, like, I don't know, it's just a very interesting, I hate saying the word interesting about this, but like, I really appreciated the exploration of this, of like both sides of this relationship while someone is going through something. So this is definitely not as lighthearted, not as fluffy as the past few novels, or few volumes, I mean, but it still is a very important story, and I really appreciated this step that was taken for our two main characters. I did read in the back that there's only one more volume, which I think is coming out sometime this year, and I am not ready to say goodbye to these characters because I love them so much. So I'm very interested to see where this story is going to end off on, but I loved seeing the journey of our characters in this one. I felt like we got quite a lot of character growth in here, and definitely some more harder hitting topics than I think everyone is used to when it comes to this couple, because like they've been hinted at, especially in the last volume, the third volume, things were hinted at, but it really dives deep into them in this book, and I think it was very important to see all sides of this situation. The next one that I ended up picking up was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. So this is basically a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai. So we have the Juliet character. Also, it's the two families are rival gangs in this little town that is starting to get run over by communists. But it's definitely like a Western culturist trying to come in and take this town over. So like all the culture and everything about like where these people are coming from was really interesting to read about. I loved that exploration set in this fantasy world, but at the same time you've got a bunch of people in this city on both sides of like from both gangs dying, and they're trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and so the two of them end up teaming up together to try to solve what's going on. So I have very mixed feelings about this book, and I'm not sure why. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. The world and the plot of this one really is reminiscent to me of Crescent City and that plot. So if like, you know what I mean, of like there's a mystery and there's two people trying to solve the mystery and it all revolves around some sort of like murder/drug thing. That's where the like similarity is for me. And you guys know I love Crescent City, or the first one, House of Earth and Blood. I love that book so much, so I was like, oh my god, this is reminiscent of it. I love it. But like I just didn't care. Like the characters didn't draw my attention in. I wasn't in love with their chemistry, because it is kind of like a second chance a little bit, because our main two characters have had a past relationship and it ended badly, and so now we're seeing the repercussions of it. Like I said, the story was interesting. The end was a little too quickly wrapped up for my taste. However, I still enjoyed it. I still liked how it ended. Like there's a huge kind of twist at the end that I wasn't prepared for. So the fact that this is a duology makes me want to pick up the second one. I don't know when I will, but I think I will pick up the second one at some point. If it was more than like 2 books, I'd probably call it quits now. But I don't know, there's nothing that I can put my hand on to explain why this didn't work for me, but something just didn't click, and I felt like most of the middle of the book just dragged for me, and I just didn't want to pick it up. I wanted to do other things. So 3.5 stars, because I still enjoyed a lot of the bits of it, and I liked her writing, and I liked the world development that she did, but I don't know. It was just kind of like generally okay. Also, I wouldn't say there's any particular trigger warnings for These Violent Delights, but if you don't like insects, that is a huge part of the plot. So like, this book's gonna gross you out. Like, I'm okay. Like, I don't love insects, but I'm okay with them, and I got pretty grossed out a couple of times. So just as a heads up. The next book is the most far from anything I've ever read before. But I did it with my friend Taylor. So we decided to buddy read this book, which is called Alien Claimed, and it is by Julie K. Cohen, I think is how you say her name. And this is the first in, what is it called? Xanthian Warriors series. But actually it's the prequel. But if you look on Goodreads, it says it's the first one. So it's a little, anyway. Knowing it's a prequel, we went into it thinking it was the first in a series, that it was a novella, that it was, you know, I don't know, just like a one and done kind of thing. You go into it and you find out that's like I had to finish it, and then I found out like at the end of the book it was the prequel. And I saw a couple of reviews online that said it was a prequel, so there's nowhere that tells you about it, which I was not exactly happy about. But knowing that it's a prequel now, I will say the amount of like world building that had to be done for this prequel was incredible. Like, the fact that I was still able to understand this world, even though, like, in the author's mind, reading this book, I've probably read the others in the series, so I don't need this giant world building moment, but she did enough to where, like, someone like me who had no idea what was going on could understand. So this is basically an alien romance. We've got this guy named Quinn, who, that's not his real name, but that's what they call him, and he is an alien, he's a warrior, and he lives on this planet that was destroyed. Like, there's this, I still don't understand everything, but there's this big force that's come in to, like, claim they're saving all these planets and actually isn't. So you've got him, and his entire planet was destroyed, and he's trying to find remnants of his people. And then you've also got our female main character, whose name I can't remember, but I think it's Ivy. And she's human, and she basically has a terrible family and has been shipped off to be a mail-order bride against her will. And so she escapes this this ship, and ends up running into Quinn. And there's a lot more to it. It's a lot of running and not trying to get killed, and the two of them, like, growing closer together. But huge trigger warnings for attempted rape, attempted sexual assault, abuse, like familial abuse, both physically and mentally, trauma, and dealing with that kind of trauma. Like, there is so much in this. It's ridiculous. And this is not a kind world. Like, this world does not look kindly on females in general, but if you're human, they look specifically badly on you. And so, like, she gets in situations that, like, not like she puts herself in these situations, but she ends up in these situations that are never good. So it's not a fun read at times, but there are good chunks throughout this book where they are away from people, and it's just the two of them on a ship, and they are, like, building this relationship together, and I really enjoyed that part of it. So will I continue with this series? Possibly. I've looked into the rest, like, who the rest of these books follow, and the second and third one follow characters that we met in this book, so I'm tempted to read those maybe at some point. I'd read them with Taylor again. Like, I'm not going to just go out and read probably this on my own. It would be fun to have, like, this as a buddy read, but I'm glad I read this, because it was nothing that I would have ever read. As I'm sure you guys know from everything on this channel, that's not a genre. Like, alien romance is not something that I, like, go looking for. So am I going to give it another chance? I might give this series another chance, but I did enjoy it. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars because I had a lot of issues with how tough this world was, and some of, like, those, like, scenes, like the sexual assault scenes and attempted rape scenes, just felt unnecessary for the plot. Like, it felt like it was in there to make the plot continue, and if you're someone who, like, that's a big trigger for them, why is that needed? So there's, like, a few things that I had issues with, but the main character, Quinn, stole the show. He made this book. Like, he is my favorite part of this story, because he is, again, one of those cinnamon roll characters in a hard exterior that will do anything for his woman. So it was really, he was cute, and he was my favorite part. So I'm glad I read it, but I'm not sure I would have ever jumped out of my comfort zone to read it if it wasn't for Taylor. So I'm glad that we both forced each other out of our comfort zones. I tried to change my shades a little bit, so maybe it'll stop going in. Okay, so the next book that I picked up was the arc that I ended up reading this month, and that is Runaway Duchess by Joanna Lowell. This is the second in the Duke Undone series. I read the first one last year. I got an arc on NetGalley for that one as well. Discovered she had another one coming out, said, oh my god, yes please, and so I was lucky enough to get it. I do have a Goodreads review of this, so I will leave that linked down below if you'd like to check more out about this. This book follows our main character, Lavinia, who the entire time I was explaining this in my TBR definitely called her the wrong name. I don't even know what it was, Vivian or something. But Lavinia basically is on hard times based on the events of the first book. Her dad is in jail and they have no money. And so she's basically forced into this marriage by her mom, but is forced into this marriage with a very old man, but also a very gross man who, like, has tried to touch her inappropriately multiple times, even before they started courting. So it's just not a great situation. So they get married and she ends up going on, I think they're heading back to their estate or his estate or something like that. Maybe they're going on their honeymoon. They're going on an adventure or something right after the wedding, and so she ends up going to a train station and runs into this man named Neil, and Neil mistakes her as this famous botanist and has this whole like conversation with her where he's talking about how, you know, they've been writing for months and I'm really glad that you're here, we can go on this grand adventure, and she sees it as her last chance to kind of get away from this life that she is going to be living and this gross man that she ended up marrying. So it's them as they traverse the countryside of his home. And I had to give this one 4 stars. It was quite cute. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely one that you need to read the first one because a lot of the situation that she is in doesn't make any sense unless you've read the first one. We do also see the characters of the first book come in near the end of it, which I really appreciated seeing that relationship because it's really strained by the end of the first book. And it was really interesting seeing Lavinia come into her own because she's grown up and basically been taught her entire life to be this woman who is pleasing to like everyone, and she is taught to be a duchess and only a duchess, and so like, or taught to be like a good wife, and so she doesn't really have any other skills, and she's basically been taught like you need to be forced into these situations in order for like you and your family to survive. And she discovers through this journey that like she doesn't actually need money to be happy, and she just kind of comes into her own. So I really appreciated that. I really enjoyed this story. Is it the most memorable thing I've ever read? No, probably not. I've probably forgotten a bunch of scenes already just filming this, so it's probably not going to stick in my brain for very long, but I did really enjoy it. It's a good, fluffy kind of, you know, traveling novel, if you want, like historical fiction travel novel, if that's your thing. And it's not as boring as other travel novels, in my opinion. Like, I don't like the travel novel usually because I find the middle part of them actually traveling really boring. But this was very entertaining because all that middle part, like they were always doing something, and it wasn't them just traveling and traveling and traveling. It was like they traveled for a little bit and then they got to where they needed to go, and then things were going on. So I really appreciated that, and I ended up really enjoying it. So yeah, I'm so glad that I was able to read that one, and I definitely will check out more from this author, which I've definitely said when I read the first book, but I do really like this author. I like her writing style. The next book I'm not going to talk too much about because I have a nice little fun vlog that just went up not too long ago, so you can check that out. But that is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. So I'll link that vlog up above. It is a spoiler-filled vlog, so if you haven't read this book, just as a heads up, that's what's going on there. But this one I ended up giving 4, I think it was 4 stars, 4.5 stars to, because there was a lot of this book that I really enjoyed and a lot of this book that was just kind of okay. So this book takes place after the events of the original ACOTAR trilogy. So it follows Nesta, who is a sister of our main character, Feyre. And in this book specifically, we were dealing with a lot of trauma. Nesta has had a lot of tough things happen, specifically right at the end of the last book, and she is dealing with all of that, and Feyre is sick of her basically like just drinking herself into a stupor and spending all of their money. So she's like, look, you're gonna go train with this guy named Cassian, which I'm sure most of you know who that is, and he's gonna train you, and you're also gonna go work in this library, and you're gonna do that stuff, and you're gonna figure out whatever's going on. And she's like, you know, how is this gonna help me? So she kind of is just like sulking the entire time. But it really follows her and Cassian's relationship, which was my favorite part of the book. I will say, all of the scenes between her and Cassian, I adored. I loved the plot, or like the character development that we got between them. The plot of this book was really lacking in my opinion because like there wasn't any. And while yes, that kind of makes sense for Nesta because like the big bad thing has mostly already happened based on the first trilogy. So we just have like remnants of stuff that are happening at this point. And this book really does focus on Nesta and her trauma and kind of coming out of that dark pit that she has kind of dug for herself. So it's really important for a lot of people. I'm sure many people can relate to what she's going through. But my biggest issue was when it comes to her powers, because there's no kind of like understanding of what it is. There's basically just this giant question mark that follows her around, and no one knows what she can do. Not even herself. She just knows that this power is like deep and dark, and she's not even sure what's going on, which is fine, except for that I felt like Sarah J. Maas was using it to her advantage, especially at the end of this book. And you're like, okay, but like, how did that work? Like, there's no explanation as to how things worked. It really just felt like a very convenient tool that the author was just like, I'm just never going to give you a definite answer on her powers, and then I can use them later to help me plot-wise. And so it felt like a very big plot convenience, which I didn't love. There's a few things about some of the characters in here that like I've grown to love in the first 3 books, and they felt different in this book. So there was just like a few things here and there, but the plot, or lack of plot, between Nesta and Cassian really drove it for me. So I still liked it. I mean, I still tapped the crap out of it, if you guys can see that. I mean, it was still really good. Was it my favorite in the series? No, I still like the second one and the third one, but the second one the best. And I'm very excited to see what other things are going to happen in the series. But the cool thing I think about this for me is that when I was done with this book, I still had a huge book hangover from this, because I love these characters. I've come to love them. I've come to love this world. It's kind of like, I'm sure many people had that feeling after coming back to this book, after being away for it for so long, of like, it's coming home, you're coming back to a familiar situation. So I really enjoyed that, because it was still this world and these characters that I knew and loved, and they were very familiar to me. So I didn't want to say goodbye to them. I wanted to keep reading things about them. So I'm excited that there are still at least 2 more books in this world. No set date on those yet, but I'm gonna be upset when there's actually no more. The next book that I ended up picking up was Winterhouse by Ben Gooderson, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I have kind of similar feelings to this as I did with, oh crap, what was it? These Violent Delights, where I was interested in it. It was kind of like a mystery book where this girl comes to this hotel, and she's spending the Christmas holidays at this hotel, and she's not sure why. Her aunt and uncle is who she lives with. They don't like her, and they don't have any money, and they like to remind her that they don't have any money, and they're like spending, basically like out of the kindness of their hearts, they're taking care of her, that kind of thing. And it gave me reminiscent feelings of like Green Glass House a little bit, where you're in this inn of sorts. It's during Christmas where it's wintry and cold, and you're trying to solve a mystery. But this one has some fantastical twists to it, which I found really interesting. And it does, you know, you've got this young girl kind of coming into her own. She's making real friends for the first time. She's really finding a place where she can be her, which is really, you know, fun to read about. But there's like a lot of the in-between, like in the middle parts, that I don't know if I was just spacing out during those, or I wasn't really paying attention much to what I was reading. But like the middle was just kind of boring to me. There was a lot of just like in-between stuff that I was like, can we move on to the story now, please? So it wasn't my favorite book that I've ever read. Will I continue with the series? Probably. There's at least 2 more in this series, and I do like these characters. My biggest thing, which I've discovered is something that I really don't like, especially in middle grade books, is that our main character, I was so annoyed at everyone for her, because she's telling everyone, even the adults that she trusts, like some of the stuff that's going on, and like, oh my gosh, you need to go check this out right now, and they don't believe her, and they just kind of like brush her off and go, okay, I'll check that out in a second, and she goes, no, you need to check it out now, and then of course, by the time they go check it out, whatever she was talking about wasn't there. So it's like these people who are supposed to be understanding, and there's kind of like our hotel owner reminds me a lot of Jupiter North from the Morgan Crow series, and how he's just kind of like eccentric and like really out there. So he should be believing the things that she's saying, but he's not. And that really bothers me. So I've discovered that like the whole not believing our main characters in middle grade is not my favorite thing, but I know it's in a lot of them because they're younger characters. So I don't know, there's just like a little bit of like character stuff that I was like, not a fan of this, but I still liked the beginning and I still liked the end, so it still got 3.5 stars. The next one I picked up was the 5th volume of Dreaming Sun by Ichigo Taganu. So this series is one that I've raved about a bunch, but it follows our main character who, I've been saying her name wrong the entire time. It's Shamana. So Shamana in the first book basically doesn't feel loved at home. Her dad and stepmom have just had a new kid, and she kind of like just feels in the way. So she kind of like pieces out and runs into this guy in the park and basically ends up living in this apartment or like this house with him and a couple of guys that she goes to school with, and then like their friends and their family and stuff. So it's very much a found family in this situation. But this volume was not my favorite. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars, mostly because in this volume specifically, our main character throughout the series kind of like flits back and forth between like who she actually thinks she's in love with. So it's a lot of the plot is just her kind of going like, I don't know, I love you now. No, actually, I love you now. And so it's a little all over the place, which is fun. Like, I don't mind that, but I know that's like a lot of people will not enjoy that part of the book. In this one, the person that she has kind of like fallen for is significantly older than her, kind of treats her like a younger sister, but then is also treating her in this situation a little bit like a tool. It does feel like he is using her and like stringing her along until he feels something for her, and that does not sit well with me. I do not like that he is using her. She's looked up to this guy for the entire series, not quite as a dad character, but definitely as like an older influence, and now all of a sudden she thinks that she's in love with him and he's using her, and I really don't like that. And then also like the whole like age gap thing, which usually doesn't bother me except for the fact that she is so young and she is like high school age. So I want to say she's like 15, 16 maybe, and he is at least 10 years older than her, if not more. And I wouldn't speak like, I would say it's just a me thing of like, I'm in America, and so like anything above the age of, so anyone above the age of 18 dating someone younger than 18, like there's this whole iffy kind of like illegal part to it. But some of his friends even mentioned the fact that she is so much younger than him, and I was like, is no one gonna comment on the fact that this is just kind of gross? So, do I still love these characters? Yes. Will I continue? Yes, I will. I have the entire series now. I'm definitely going to continue with them. They're not that long, and I'm hoping things get solved in the 6th one, which is why I decided to put it on my TBR, because I really want to get back to where we were, why I loved the series. I felt like this volume took a turn, and I did not like the turn that it took. So, I did give it 3.5 stars. The more I think about it, the more I might bump it down to 2. So, we'll see. I don't know. It's not my favorite, but I'm hoping that it just gets better from here, honestly. The next one I picked up was the book that I'm using kind of as my nonfiction pick of the month, and that is this giant book that's called The Best of Miranda, and this is by Miranda Hart. So Miranda is a British TV show that was on the BBC for a few seasons, and it was written by Miranda Hart, who also played our main character, Miranda. And there's also a US show that's called Call Me Kat. It's on Fox right now with Mayim Bialik, and it's like the US version based on this show. Well, I adore this show. I think it's hilarious. I think it's so funny. And so a couple of, not this Christmas, but last Christmas, my husband gifted me this book. And so I decided to pick it up because I do enjoy this show. So I ended up giving this one I think 4.5. I didn't give it 4.5 stars. My only issue with this book is that this book is basically a collection of scripts, and it's got like moments where you've got Miranda's notes on the individual parts, but then at certain times there's like multiple pages in a row with no like notes on them or anything like that, and you get like barely anything, like a page or something like this, like a page like this to explain that script and why, kind of like a little behind the scenes info on that script. And then there's a few things at the end of the script where she'll talk kind of like behind the scenes things, a couple more extra like tidbits about, she calls them tidbits, that wasn't me just stumbling, a couple extra like little things here and there about these like situations, how she was writing them, these characters, some of the people, the actors in it, and things like that. I wanted there to be more behind the scenes thing. I wanted to know more about the writing. I wanted to know more about the shooting. I wanted that kind of thing. And this was basically just a book of scripts. I mean, it was cool to see her, like, little, like, notes on them, and especially in the, like, first couple of scripts, because they were, like, the first season, and she, like, mentions things of, like, ooh, could this be a recurring thing? And it was kind of cool to see little things like that, but I wanted more behind the scenes, and I didn't get that. I mean, that's the point of this. The point was just to show off a bunch of scripts. So, like it says favorite episodes plus added treats, so, like, it's her talking about her favorites, but I just wanted more behind the scenes. I didn't want just like a book of scripts. So that was my biggest issue with this one, and that's purely me. I just wanted more information about other extra stuff, but I still really enjoyed it. Like, it's funny, as I'm reading these scripts, I'm seeing the episodes in my head because I've watched them so many times, and I know exactly how things are being said, and I'm reading them in, like, the actors' voices. It was just, like, it was a really fun experience, and I would stop every, like, page or so to tell my husband something that, like, I had just learned about behind the scenes, and it was, like, it was really cool. So, like, overall, my experience was great. It was just, like, that one little itty-bitty thing that I wish was different, because then it would have made it 5 stars. But I still really enjoyed this book. The next book that I ended up picking up was the first volume of Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith. So I'm sure many people know what this is about because it's relatively new. Like, I think it came out in, like, the fall last year. But this is a comic that was a web comic or graphic novel. That was a web comic that has been turned into physical comic. As you can see, like, these beautiful colors. Like, Persephone is pink and Hades is blue, and I love it. And, like, all of them are different colors. Like, there's one up here that shows all 3 brothers. I'll show it to you in a second if I could find a good, here we go. So you've got, like, Hades and Zeus and Poseidon, and I just love the art style in this. But it's based on Greek mythology. It's the story of Hades and Persephone, and this is the first 50 comics, 50 volumes, 50 episodes, that's the right one to say. And the second one is coming out in, I think, June-ish, according to my pre-order that I did. So I really enjoyed this. It got 4 stars for me because, like I said, the art was absolutely stunning. I love this very modern take on the Greek gods. They do still have kind of, like, powers and stuff. Like, it's got all of the, like, the things that we know about Greek mythology, but in a very modern city setting. So I really enjoyed that. I would have liked to see more interactions between Hades and Persephone. Now, I know this is the very beginning, and, like, their relationship is just starting. And the way this ends, I know the next volume is going to have quite a lot more of interaction between them. But, like, I just wanted to see more of them. Like, they're why I'm here. But I still really enjoyed this one, but I did want to read to you the kind of, like, content warning at the beginning, because this is not an easy book to read. So it says, content warning, Lore Olympus regularly deals with themes of physical and mental abuse, sexual trauma, and toxic relationships. And that is definitely true in this book. I'm sure it continues in the rest of the books as well, but in this volume specifically, those are big, big things. I'm glad I finally got to read it, and now I'm caught up, and I can't wait for the second volume to come out, and I just can't get over how absolutely stunning the art in this book is. Like, it's just beautiful, and I think it's just her use of colors, and I'm so curious why she did it the way that she did it, but it's stunning. And the very last book that I ended up picking up in the month of January was Elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger. Yes, I said it wrong. Most times I mentioned it before, but according to the audiobook and even in the book, it's Elatsoe. So that's our main character, Elatsoe, but she is called Elle, or Ellie, and it takes place in this contemporary world, but magic is a thing in this world, and it also, like, it's very modernized in the sense of, like, you can relate to a lot of things that are happening in this. There's some conversations, because our main character is indigenous, there's conversations obviously of colonialism and, like, stolen land and things like that, which is a very important topic, and I'm glad it was mentioned in here. But it's like nothing historically that we know today is different, except for the fact that there's, like, magic. So this, I think, would be a really good book to read around the spooky season if you're someone who likes supernatural things, because this book focuses a lot on death and ghosts and things like that, because Elatsoe comes from this family that has a really deep connection with spirits and the past and ghosts specifically. So like our main character, she has a little dog that like follows her around that is a ghost because her actual like real life dog that she had growing up has died, and so his ghost has just kind of like followed her around and he's like been helping her out and stuff. But most of this book, which I did not know going into it, this is a mystery book. It surrounds her, and she, like I said, has a really deep connection to spirits, so her dog kind of freaks out when anything bad is happening, and so she's trying to figure out what's going on. And they get a call from her cousin, I think, or her aunt or something, that her cousin, Trevor, has died in a car accident. And then that night, he visits her in a dream and basically says, hey, I was murdered by this guy. Please keep my family safe. And she's like, sure thing. And so she goes out with her mom to help out his widow and his son. And basically, I mean, everyone believes her. Like, when she's telling them that she's had this dream about her cousin and what, like, the person he says it is, and they all believe her, and she's trying to, like, basically solve this murder and prove that this guy did it. And it gets real deep real fast, and she has a friend, Jay, who comes out to help her. And there's, like, a few things about this fantasy world that I don't quite understand, but I thought it was crazy inventive because it's basically like a contemporary fantasy, because you've got a very realistic world that we can relate to, that we see every day, but you got these like things peppered in, like the fact that she has this like dog that walks by her. No one bats an eye that she has a ghost dog. So it's really interesting. And one of the, I think, biggest things beyond the plot and just like, it really revolves around grief and revenge and things like that, and different family members dealing with grief, and her cousin basically comes back to her in dreams to basically say, like, I need to get revenge, things like that. But also this very realistic, I would assume, I'm not indigenous, I'm not a minority, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. So there's definitely moments in this book where she notices people looking at her differently. So like when she's out with her friend Jay is white, and so like he doesn't notice any of this stuff, but she notices people looking at her a little bit differently. Like she'll go into a museum, and the person who like checks her in basically like lets her know that there is a camera watching her every move. But it's just like she brushes it off as like every day, this happens to me, this is just something I deal with. And I think because it's so not focused on, that it stood out to me so much, because like, of course, like, that's something that she's going to have to deal with every day, is people looking at her differently because her skin tone is a little bit different. And it's just, I think there's beauty in how unfocused the author is on that, and just like mentions it here and there, people looking at her a little bit different, people looking at her and not her friend, just like her going about her day, noticing, oh, so-and-so's taking, keeping track of me, I need to make sure I'm not doing anything weird. And little things like that, of just like everyday stuff. And I think because it was peppered in like that, made it so much more impactful for like readers like me who don't go through that every single day. And so it was, I don't know, it was just something that I noticed and I thought was really important to mention. And like as a white reviewer and as a white reader, I appreciated that being in there, because that shows just how normal it is, which is really unfortunate. And so, I don't know, there's just like little things like that are peppered in. Like the plot mainly focuses on this mystery and like these ghosts and her just trying to figure out what happened to her cousin. But it definitely has this social commentary undertone throughout, which I thought was very important to include. So that is it. Those were all of the books that I ended up picking up in January. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. As always, let me know down below if you've read any of the books that I have mentioned, or what is something that you picked up at the beginning of the year. What was your very, very first book of 2022? I would love to know. Ooh, emoji. I keep forgetting to do the emoji. What should we do? Let's do, because I just turned to my February page, let's do a little rose, or like a plant of sorts. Do you guys like plant leaves? A growing thing. Because I'm ready for spring, you guys. I'm ready. It's February. Let's go. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all of that out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!